Hello, Year 9 students. This is Mrs. Williams here, and just a shout out to everybody from Good News Lutheran College. We are beginning our study of the Hunger Games, and I'd also like to welcome anyone else who's watching from another school. The way I make these videos, I just annotate and summarize, do a little bit of analysis as I go. And so we'll be going through Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games and starting with chapter 1. So grab your pens, highlighters, sticky notes, get ready to annotate. So we're going to begin on page 3, which is the beginning of chapter 1. And this is set in District 12. And the thing you'll immediately notice is the first person narration. So Katniss is the narrator. It has a limited narrative perspective. The first person narration inside Katniss's head, basically we only see things from her perspective. So we get a really good understanding of what's happening in Katniss's inner world. How is she processing things? How's she reacting? How are the challenges that she faces? What's going on for her? And so that Suzanne Collins uses that technique to really help us understand the trials and understand what Katniss goes through as she faces the Hunger Games. And so some things to notice. So I noticed the description of the mother, and if you just read here in this section here, in sleep my mother looks younger, still worn but not so beaten down. And so there's the sense there that she's had a hard life. She's been beaten down by life. And there's also the implication that she used to be beautiful, but she's not anymore. Yeah, which is Prim's face is as beautiful, as fresh as a raindrop, as lovely as the primrose for which she was named. My mother was very beautiful once too, or so they tell me. So she doesn't know that her mum was beautiful. She's just been told it, which means almost like her mother's physical appearance has been destroyed by life in much the same way as her emotional and mental health has too. So if we turn over, it's interesting we learn about Prim's cat Buttercup, who hates Katniss, and she thinks he still remembers years ago how he tried to drown him in a bucket when Prim brought him home. And from our modern perspective, from our Western world, the idea of somebody trying to drown a cat, we see that as horrifying. Like, why? That's cruel. That's animal cruelty. So we learn through this that there must be something really bad about this futuristic dystopian society, that the last thing Katniss needed was another mouth to feed, that this kitten, rather than being a pet that brings joy, would be a burden. So we see Katniss carrying the burden of the family, another mouth to feed, and imagining how she's going to have to look after it. Is this a cruel thing, or is it survival? That's that question. The potential to drown a cat. But Prim begged so hard and cried that she had to let him stay. So we also learn the deep, abiding affection with which Katniss holds her sister. And then there's the setting description of the area of the seam. We learn it's crawling with coal miners and the men and women with hunched shoulders and swollen knuckles. So we learn these citizens are exhausted, okay? And they have broken nails. They've stopped trying to scrub the coal dust out of their broken nails, and they have sunken faces. And the streets, the black cinder streets of District 12, and today they're empty though. So I think that's really these sorts of vocabulary that is used to describe the streets of District 12 was really good for you to take to contrast later on when we see the opulence, the wealth, the extremes of the capital, and so the contrast between the exhaustion and the dirty black streets of District 12, it becomes even more severe and apparent. And so Katniss then describes the meadow, the barbed wire fences, which technically they say is to protect them, but actually in reality is there as a type of jail almost. But it's normally electrified, or they're supposed to be, but because they only get a couple of hours of electricity, it's safe to actually cross. And so Katniss crosses there. She gets a bow, an arrow, and there's then on page 6 and 7 descriptions of Katniss's patterns of hunting. What happens to Katniss's father? That he was blown to bits in a mine explosion. Okay. And she was traumatized and still wakes up screaming for him to run. And then notice the irony of the peacekeepers, the fact that the soldiers from the capital are known as peacekeepers, when in fact they're actually, well, in some ways you could argue they are keeping the peace because there's no outright war, but actually they're an oppressive force. I might even make a note there, irony, because not keeping peace, but an oppressive force. Okay. And so, Katniss, she describes her hunting patterns and how she gets food that she sells. And there we go. The oppressive, controlling figures of the peacekeepers. And we learn about Katniss here in this section on page 7, that she used to scare her mother to death when she was little because she would blurt things out about District 12 and about the people who run the country, Panem, from the capital, because she would see the unfairness of life and she would blurt them out. And I've written just a comment there, the innocence of children. But eventually she learns to hold her tongue. She learns to turn her features into an indifferent mask so that no one could ever read her thoughts. There's a little bit of foreshadowing there too. It's what she needs to do to survive, and she learns how to survive by holding her tongue and putting on a mask. And that skill, one, the desire for survival, but also the skill of being able to control her features actually enables her to survive. So there's foreshadowing there too. And then she meets Gail. Notice this. Gail says, "I never smile except in the woods." So the forest, while the District 12 is the oppressive, controlling force of the capital and the struggles of life in the future of Panem, the society of Panem, the forest represents freedom, represents joy and being able to be herself. And so we see this lovely conversation, the first conversation between Katniss and Gail, and again they're discussing hunting. Gail sort of jokes that he shot a loaf of bread. Obviously it's bakery bread, and he swapped a squirrel for it, and so they're having a feast or a special meal because of Hunger Games, and the irony of happy Hunger Games when it's obviously not something that's happy for anybody. May the odds be ever in your favor. Again, that literary technique of irony there that we notice. There's so many ironic statements within. And so we notice not only is there a class difference between District 12 and the capital, but we will notice also within District 12, there is also a class system. So there's the coal miners, and then here there is the small merchant class. So Katniss's mum's parents were of the small merchant class, whereas the dad was the coal miner. And so there's a description there in page 9 and 10 there. And her mum must have really loved him, her dad, to leave her home in the nicer part of District 12 for the seam, which is where the coal miners live. And then here, all I can see though, I try to remember that when all I can see is the woman who sat by, blank and unreachable, while her children turned to skin and bones. I try to forgive her for my father's sake, but to be honest, I'm not the forgiving type. She's strong, she's unforgiving, and that's probably been necessary in order to survive. I put a little bracket there, PTSD, because there's clearly some sort of trauma or mental illness that her mum has actually undergone, and later on we see that as well. And even now, just questioning for survival, is Katniss uncaring and unsympathetic, or is she justified in feeling this degree of unforgiveness? Anyway, so there's again description of the valley, the forest, which is teeming with life. So again, that sense of freedom, that sense of true identity and joy that they can have. Excuse me. And there's a description of their relationship, that there's friendship, but nothing romantic. So on page 12, you notice the foreshadowing of the fact. So there's, after the reaping, everyone should be supposed to celebrate. But at least 2 families will pull their shutters, lock their doors, and try to figure out how they will survive the painful weeks to come. So we're already foreshadowing the fact that it will be Katniss's family who is in that situation. So then there's a description of the hob, where it's inside an abandoned warehouse that used to have coal. And there's a barter system that's in place that is described here. That's clearly they survive through being able to swap things and exchange things. And here I've written that a note that basically Colin creates this impression of the difficulties, the struggles of life in District 12. Okay, so just notice that there on page 12. And everybody, the irony too of wearing your best clothes for reaping day, where 2 kids are going to be sent off as tributes to basically die in the Hunger Games. And if I end up going to the Capitol, I want to look nice, don't I? So that, again, that ironic statements. And so Madge is the daughter of the mayor, and she's not going to have to go to the Capitol because her name isn't in the so you can get, so I think there's an explanation later on here of the Tesserae, which is putting in your names. You get an extra name in for some supplies of grain and oil, and so you can have your name in multiple times. And Madge only has her name in once, so there's not a chance that, or not once, 6 times or something. So 5 entries. And there's that real sense of unfairness, that of being almost like a lottery. And we notice, the note that I've made here is the Capitol's manipulative strategy to sow division. So even that idea that starving people have to put their name in and gamble more to feed their family, creates division between those who are slightly more well off within District 12 who don't have to put their name in more than the minimum. And we can see that represented through Madge, the daughter of the mayor, and through Gail, for example, whose name is in there multiple times. Here we say 42 times, and Katniss's 20 times. And here at 16, the top of 16, Gail is furious. He's smouldering, and his rage, though, seems pointless to Katniss, although she doesn't say so. She does agree with him, but what good is yelling about the Capitol in the middle of the woods? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make things fair. It doesn't fill our stomachs. So notice that repetition, and it's a particular type of repetition that we call anaphora, which is repetition at the start of a sentence. And it really here is emphasizing the futility, the pointlessness of even trying to rebel or fight back, because it doesn't change anything, that there's no point in any type of rebellion for the oppressed, downtrodden citizens of of Panem, particularly in this case District 12. And so there's a dress laid out for her, that Prim here, her first reaping, she's about as safe as you can get since there's only, her name's entered once. I feel like that's a clear example of foreshadowing, that it's almost like she's asking, from a storytelling perspective, for her name to be read out. So here they head to the square, and there's an air of grimness. There's camera crews perched like buzzards on rooftops, only adding to the effect. So personification there too. Here, notice the 12 to 18-year-olds who are herded into roped areas. And that verb, to herd, yeah, it's usually only used for livestock, okay? You herd cattle, right? And so it really does, my analysis here is that verb herded really emphasizes the dehumanizing treatment that the Capitol soldiers and the peacekeepers and the way that the system works, that the citizens of District 12 are oppressed. And here there's people who are betting on which two kids it is. They're giving odds on whether they'll be Seam or Merchant. And again, that dehumanizing treatment where something that is going to call, like the death of people, is actually bet on. And looking at page 21, there is the explanation here, perhaps the historical context of Panem. Okay. So the history of Panem, it rose up of the ashes out of what used to be called North America, and so the times of the war and a treaty that was made afterwards. Now, the fact that, this is my analysis, but I feel like the fact that it's not an unknown place, so it's, sometimes there's novels set in like places that we've never heard of, but the fact that it's set in a futuristic society that is connected to our modern world, okay, so it is in what used to be North America, so we know it's futuristic in this world, really establishes a warning to our current citizens that it's like, this is what will happen. So Suzanne Collins is kind of using this dystopian tale to warn society about those extreme excesses, about oppressive, controlling forces, about corruption, about excess, about opulence and wealth gap and all of those things, and even potentially the dangers of reality television and war. And so then there's the explanation of the rules of the Hunger Games, one boy, one girl as tributes, and they come into an arena. And I've just written these cruel measures of fear-mongering and psychological warfare as a form of control. The fact that they attempt to, the capital attempts to keep control over the rest of the country of Panem and the districts through this psychological warfare, the threat of one's children being taken away and murdered, essentially. And it being framed as a good thing, or it framed as something that the districts deserve because of this war that happened 74 years ago. Anyway, okay, and then there's a description of Hamish Abernathy, who is the previous victor, and he's drunk, and later on we learn a lot more about that. And then we've Effie Trinket, who is bright and bubbly, and that contrast of her bright and bubbly attitude, and even these words, happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favour. So those, like the bright outfit and that's the contrasts there are just so overwhelming. The unfairness and the injustice and the irony of her happy words and happy attitude to something that is the least happy day for these two tributes' lives. And we learn a little bit about Effie's character here too, Effie Trinket's character, her bright and bubbly attitude. And she goes on a bit about what an honour it is to be here, although everyone knows she's just aching to get bumped up to a better district where they have proper victors, not drunks who molest you in front of the entire nation. And so we end here at the end of chapter 1, which Effie draws the lot, okay? And she's hoping, it's not me, I hope it's not me, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. And it's like this, be careful what you wish for, because it's not Katniss, it is Primrose Everdeen. And of course, that's a bit of a cliffhanger, because then we have to know what happens next. But we're going to stop there. I know that was a long chapter, because there was a lot of introductory analysis to do. So I hope you've gotten some notes on your sticky notes, your highlighting, and you've got some great things that you can use in future essays.